Pew Research Center released a religious survey recently. The survey was how the pandemic affected religiosity in a number of different countries. We knew the pandemic was affecting religiosity in a few different ways, but this is well-researched data that we can use to get a better view of the situation. They actually asked them two different questions in this survey. They asked if their own religious faith became stronger, and they asked if they believed the virus strengthened other people's faith. So in the US, 28% of people surveyed said their faith had become stronger as a result of the outbreak. And the same number, 28%, said they believed the religious faith of others in the US became stronger. For the most part, that's reflected all the way down. In every country, people believed it was strengthening people's faith at the same rate that they felt it strengthened their own. But there is some deviation. In the Netherlands, for example, only 7% said it strengthened their own faith, but 17% said they believed it strengthened others' faith too. The Netherlands isn't particularly religious, though. The US is an extremely religious country, so naturally they were at the very top of the list. Next in line was Spain. 16% said the pandemic strengthened their faith, 15% in Italy, 13% in Canada, and 10% in Australia, the UK, France, and South Korea. But interestingly enough, the same survey also asked people if religion is very important, somewhat important, or not important at all, and they compared that to people who said they think it strengthened religiosity in the country. Of the people surveyed in the US who said that religion has strengthened their faith, 45% of those people said religion is very important to them, but only 11% said it was somewhat important, not too important, or not at all important. So here's the bottom line. The pandemic polarized people dramatically. If you were already pretty religious, it made you more religious. If you weren't that religious before, or you weren't religious at all, for the most part, you kind of left church and never went back. I know in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, the pandemic caused them to hemorrhage members like crazy. The brainwashing got unplugged. People were leaving like mad. So much that they actually started going in reverse. They started net losing people. That was fantastic news. But the people who stayed became more radicalized. We see the exact same process playing out in politics. Trump radicalized a lot of people and freed a lot of people too. They saw how insane the Republican Party was getting and parted ways. If nothing else, we can say with confidence that 2020 was the year of polarization. You guys remember Josh Feuerstein, right? He's the radical right-wing pastor who got famous for telling Starbucks his name was Merry Christmas, so they'd be forced to say Merry Christmas because, you know, there's a war on Christmas, or something. He also did a video about masks. He said he'd never wear one, and to those who say he should, he had one word. Bah. He did that for like 5 straight minutes. It was awkward as fuck. Dude is honestly an embarrassment. Anyways, it turns out he was one of the speakers at the Stop the Steal rally in DC, January 5th, the rally that led up to the Capitol attack. I had no idea he was there. Here's what he said. Quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Bible declares that the thief and the enemy has come, but to kill, to steal, and to destroy. The Bible declares that it was David that defeated the lion and the bear. Unfortunately, today, we don't fight lions and bears. We fight liberals and rhinos." Unquote. In case you didn't know, rhino is a term thrown around a lot by Trump supporters right now. It means Republican in name only. Now it basically means anybody who claims to be Republican but doesn't support Trump. Anyways, let's continue with the quote. "I close with this thought, as I am echoed by patriot preachers and the Black Robe Regiment. It was the preacher Emerson that stood here, a Black Robe Regiment, from his pulpit and preached to several hundred one Sunday morning when he took off the black robe that signified that he was a preacher, and he said, 'There's a time for peace and there's a time for war, and now it is time for war.' And so today, I stand with the Black Robe Regiment, and I am one preacher declaring to patriots, it is time for war. Let us stop the steal." End quote. This is the kind of language people were using leading up to the Capitol insurrection. Words matter. People listen when this guy speaks, and they do what they believe he wants them to do. Same with Trump. Multiple people at these rallies leading up to the insurrection spoke with this kind of language and rhetoric. It's honestly no surprise at all that this happened. I would be surprised if it didn't happen. They were trying to rev people up and get them to get physical. They were trying to get them to take control of the government, take out congressmen so they could be replaced with patriots. They almost succeeded. The speakers at the events need to be held accountable. I hope they get arrested and charged with inciting an insurrection. What they did falls into a narrow area of speech that isn't free. There are certain things you can't say and do, even in America, which has very free and open speech laws, all things considered. And I respect that. I like the fact that our free speech laws are so open. open. But there has to be a line. Everybody has one. The US even has one. And legally speaking, I believe they crossed it. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't incite a riot. Will they face legal repercussions for this? Probably not. Extreme right-wing Trump-supporting pastor David Barton had something interesting to say on his show recently. He said, quote, "We're getting attacked because you love Trump and you're a cult for Trump. What happens is you cannot back away from engaging in the debate. If they want to call me a homophobe, I say, oh, so you're a heterophobe, are you? Just turn it back in the other direction. Say you've got this bias against heterosexual people. You can't disengage from the debate just because they're being mean or just because they're saying things about you." End quote. Now that's interesting. He's trying to give his audience gaslighting and propaganda strategies to deal with criticism. This is called thought-stopping techniques or thought-terminating cliches, well studied in psychology. Instead of listening to the criticism and honestly considering it, you're supposed to deny it, attack the other person, and reverse the victim and the offender, aka Darvo. It's a pretty common abuse tactic. It makes the other person feel like they're to blame. They're the one at fault. People throw the term gaslighting around a lot without really knowing what it is. They tend to misuse it. The term came from a movie in the mid-1900s, back before everybody had electricity in their homes. They used to have natural gas lines running to their houses, and they'd have these lamps connected to them. You'd light the lamp and turn the gas on. That's how they lit their house. Well, in the movie, this guy kept turning the gas lights up and down so the flame would get higher and lower, higher and lower. And he was telling the woman in the movie that she was crazy. The gas lights were exactly the same height as they were before. It came to the point where she was questioning her own sanity. She didn't know what was real and what wasn't. It goes beyond lying. It's about taking a piece of information that people know without question, something they can see with their own eyes, and denying it to their face, telling them the exact opposite is true. The end result is a person being gaslighted starts to lose their grip on reality because they feel they can't trust their own senses or knowledge. At the end of the movie, the woman finally found somebody who told her that the gaslights really were going up and down. She found what's called a ground, a link to reality, somebody to affirm to her that she really isn't crazy. But that's what gaslighting is. That's the whole strategy. My dad used it on my mom. She is a very broken individual, even now, as a result of gaslighting that took place over 20 years ago. It doesn't get lower than that. And that's what David Barton is teaching his congregation to do. He's teaching them to shut down criticism and flip it on the other person. You guys remember Deanna Lorraine, right? She's the InfoWars quote-unquote reporter I covered recently who spent like 15 minutes talking about how much she loved the insurrectionists and how you can't call yourself a patriot or a Republican if you're criticizing them. She's a QAnon supporter, or at least she was before the election. Well, she's back in the news. She said, quote, "I, for one, am sick of just looking at clues and taking guesses and kind of following down a rabbit hole where it leads to nothing. And there's just a lot of broken promises that are not delivered. A patriot doesn't blindly follow a plan. We shouldn't be blindly following anything or anyone, especially when there's no evidence for that plan ever materializing. Every time this plan was supposed to happen, or Trump was supposedly playing 5D chess and supposedly setting traps, or about to do this, at no point in the last 4 years has that trap ever been closed. Has the chess move ever been checkmated by Trump? None of these hopes and ideas have ever been fulfilled. Not one. So a smart person looks at the evidence, looks at historical evidence, and looks at a track record, and doesn't keep doing or wishing for something that has no evidence for it being able to materialize." End quote. Wow, so I guess she's backing off the QAnon stuff now. She's probably upset that Trump just left office without pardoning her insurrectionist buddies or anything. Why didn't he pardon them anyways? He could have, with basically no consequences. They were fighting for him. They did exactly what he wanted them to do. It just so happened that some Capitol Police and some Secret Service agents were on top of protecting them. If they'd all backed away and let things play out, it probably would have ended much worse for Congress than it did. I mean, there were gallows hung out back. Either way, Trump would have had to have done a lot more than pardon the insurrectionists to keep the QAnoners. You guys remember the Q shaman? Dude was arrested within days of the insurrection. Massive Trump supporter. Massive QAnon believer. Well, his lawyer came out recently and said he'd be willing to testify against Trump. Holy shit! The claims made by the QAnon group were pretty intricate and specific, and as as Deanna Lorraine said, they never materialized. They claimed Trump was about to have all his political opponents arrested. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and even the Bushes. They were all part of the deep state. They pushed it to the very last available second with their conspiracies, even claiming that it would happen at the inauguration. QAnon supporters even watched the inauguration for that exact reason, to watch Biden get arrested before he was sworn in. And nothing. I have to say, it's pretty entertaining to watch their conspiracies crumble right in front of them. I've been following Johnny Enlow for a while now. I even did a whole video about him on my main channel the other day. He's one of the many preachers who worked Trump into their prophecies. Prophesied that Trump is going to be president for the next 4 years. Claimed that God told them that he would. They even got really specific with it. They said that God told them that Trump would be a hinge of the ages. He received the Cyrus anointing. That comes from a verse in Isaiah 45 where Cyrus returned the Jews to Jerusalem after Nebuchadnezzar took him away. These preachers said that God told them that he usually leaves voting up to the people in the US, but this time around, God was taking it out of our hands, and he was installing Trump as the political leader himself. So how do you think they reacted after Trump lost? Their entire belief system was just invalidated. They said God specifically said he was going to install Trump for 4 more years. He had absolutely no chance of losing the presidency. That's what they said. Well, Johnny Enlow has come up with a new explanation for what happened. He was on the Elijah Streams YouTube channel and website recently with Steve Schultz, and he said, quote, "There's all these dimensions that the Lord is coming to effect and change right now, and President Trump still has a very active, viable role in that. Believe me, God is doing things with him, and I don't want to get into it more than that." End quote. Wow, he is seriously claiming special knowledge after all his failed predictions. I love it. Let's continue. Quote, "Trump's not a passive player. He's recognized from heaven as the primary government leader on planet Earth. People need to know that. From heaven, President Trump is recognized as the primary government leader on planet Earth." End quote. Well, that's weird. The primary leader on Earth? The U.S. only encompasses like 350 million people. That's only like 4% of the world's population. Sure, the U.S. is pretty politically powerful, because for one thing, we had a lot of innovation in the past 200 years or so. We have social media companies. But the most powerful? I don't think so. The European Union holds a lot of power, and so does China, for better or worse. The U.S. is only one piece of the puzzle. Trump is not the political leader for the world. He isn't even the political leader of the U.S. He has literally no political power. The only power he has is the power to destroy the Republican Party by splintering it, something I'm really hoping we get to see. But I think the traditional Republican leaders will probably talk him out of it, sadly. Anyways, it's hours of endless entertainment to watch these preachers flail around wildly while they try to come up with explanations for why they were right all along.